You know, when we go to the New Testament, the core, the heart of the New Testament is really familiarity. We can know God, and it's been drilled into us from evangelists, we can know God as our personal Savior, right? We can know God in such a way that we are friends with God. This type of a mentality, which is true in itself. The New Testament even tells us that God's own Spirit is willing to live inside of us. You can't get any more familiar than that, can you? Familiarity is the essence, really, of the New Testament. But the New Testament is a whole lot less books than the Old Testament. The New Testament is a whole lot less time than the Old Testament. So there's a balance that has to be made. In Genesis 1:26, we are told that God made us in His image. In the Gospels, we are told God made Himself in our image. And that becomes part of the focus. Hebrews 2:17 and 18 even tells us that as our high priest, He is someone who can relate to us. God can even identify with our suffering. What a wonderful thing. God can even identify with the temptations that we suffer. What a wonderful thing. He identifies. He is one of us. Familiarity in the New Testament. But here comes a big question. What happens if we get so familiar and yet we lose the sense of reverence? What is familiarity if there is no reverence? Let me throw out a quick an analogy this way. Imagine in us that we all love AC, right? Power, alternating current, power. Everyone loves it. The reason we are in here today is partly due to that. If we had no power and there was no heat, probably, I don't doubt if many of us would have come this morning. We love power. We love electric power. However, we don't go out and handle the power lines with our bare hands just because we're familiar with it. There is a type of reverence or respect that goes along with that power, doesn't it? The same thing with God. How is it if we're familiar but have no reverence? How will that work out? In the Western church, where do we really stand with all of this? We have people, younger folks, who take God not at all sometimes, maybe very casually. Even those who have a spiritual hunger, there's many people who have given up on a traditional religion or a traditional Christianity for something they like better, something suiting their preferences. Even those of us who are church goers, how casually do we really take this? How casually? Even this morning, I mean, how many people are not in here simply because, in other churches, because it's not convenient? I wanted to sleep in. It was a little too cold. It was a little something. Casually taking it, church hopping, consumerism in the church. What does it have for me? If it doesn't, I'll go somewhere else. This whole thing, it shows of a casual relationship with God. Maybe a little too familiar in all of this. And what do we get for it? We have a weak spiritual walk. A weak spiritual experience with God, even in the Western church. We can't speak to, I don't know, churches in China or those places under persecution. Although I'm suspect if somebody is truly willing to die and be in prison for their faith, I've got a feeling that their faith is equal or better than my own. That's some serious reverence for God going on. But if it is weak, what's the problem? Is God all of a sudden weak in our age? In this time, is God just fading away? He's just getting too old? Or is the church itself weak? Well, we can only assume, since God doesn't change from age to age, that it is not God but the church. And the problem isn't familiarity. Everyone has heard about Christ in our culture, who can be your personal Savior, who can be your friend. God is looking for you. We've heard that. Maybe the problem is we're a little too familiar. We have all the familiarity, but not the reverence. Not the reverence of an all-powerful, all-wise, creation-sustaining God. Maybe that's where we're lacking. It is reverence that builds the mighty fortress in our distress. It's reverence that gives us the holy confidence of the promises that God gives. It's reverence that gives us the perspective through holy fear. It's reverence that does these things.